before we talk about transforming your soil, we have to understand something many gardeners overlook. Worms don't leave because we've done something wrong. They leave because the environment simply doesn't feel safe yet. It took me years to realize this. I remember opening my garden bed one spring morning, hoping to see those little signs of life tunnels castings movement. Instead, I found stillness, empty soil that felt more like a forgotten corner than a thriving home. Worms are far more sensitive than most people imagine. Their entire world depends on gentle consistency. When soil becomes compacted, they struggle to breathe. When it dries too quickly, they dehydrate. When temperatures swing from hot days to cold nights, they retreat deeper underground or leave entirely. And when the biological life in the soil fades, the microbes, the fungi, the quiet moisture that holds everything together, worms instinctively search for a better place. You may have experienced this too. Maybe you added worms to a raised bed, only to find no trace of them a month later. Maybe you've watered, amended, even tilled, hoping to create conditions that feel welcoming. Yet the soil still behaves more like a stubborn guest than a willing partner. But here's the shift that changed everything for me. Worms don't follow our intentions. They follow the environment. They don't stay because we want them to stay. They stay when the soil feels like home, soft, moist, sheltered, and full of slow, steady life. Once you understand this, frustration melts into possibility. Because if soil can push worms away, it can also learn to invite them back. And that's where our simple cardboard trick begins its quiet magic. Now that we've uncovered why worms may leave your soil, let's look at what truly makes them want to stay. Think of worms as quiet gardeners working behind the scenes. They don't ask for much, but the few things they do need are absolutely essential. Once I learned to focus on these needs instead of forcing results, my garden began to change in ways I could actually see and feel. Worms flourish where moisture lingers gently, not just on the surface, but deep enough for them to breathe through their skin. Even short bursts of dryness can send them seeking shelter elsewhere. They also rely on a constant supply of organic carbon, the kind that comes from decomposing leaves, fading roots, and bits of plant matter that break down slowly over time. These materials are not just food for worms, they're nourishment for the microbes worms depend on. Without microbes, soil becomes an empty room rather than a living home. Many older gardeners I've met share the same story: years of chemical fertilizers, construction backfill, or simple neglect strip the soil of its biological life. And once that life fades, worms don't just disappear, they're pushed away. I once helped a retired teacher revive her small vegetable bed. She told me her soil felt tired, almost as if it had forgotten how to grow. When we restored moisture and added gentle carbon sources, worms began to return within weeks, as if they had simply been waiting for the invitation. Worms don't thrive in perfection. They thrive in balanced, steady moisture, a dark cover, slow decaying carbon, and a living world beneath their tiny bodies. And this is why something as humble as cardboard can make all the difference. If you've ever walked through a quiet forest, you may have noticed something magical happening under your feet. No one tills the soil. No one adds fertilizer. Yet year after year, the earth stays soft, dark, and full of life. The secret lies in the steady layers of fallen leaves, twigs, bark, and plant matter that break down slowly and quietly. That natural blanket is what worms seek, and remarkably plain brown cardboard mimics that environment almost perfectly. Cardboard is made from cellulose, the same plant-based fibers found in leaves and wood. When laid on soil, it acts like a gentle protective canopy. It absorbs moisture like a sponge, holding it long enough for worms to feel safe. It blocks harsh sunlight, creating the cool darkness worms instinctively gravitate toward. And as it begins to soften, fungi and microbes weave themselves through the fibers, transforming what looks like trash into a thriving buffet of microscopic life. I remember visiting a friend's backyard where nothing seemed to grow. Her soil was pale dry and nearly silent. We laid a sheet of soaked cardboard over one corner just to experiment. Within a week, tiny fungal strands appeared underneath. 2 weeks later, she lifted it and gasped worms had gathered in clusters, weaving through the softened fibers as if they had been waiting for a sign that the soil was safe again. That's the quiet power of cardboard. It doesn't force change, it invites it. It mimics the forest floor where nature rebuilds itself with no rush, no pressure, and no chemicals. Cardboard simply creates conditions. Worms already trust shelter, moisture, darkness, and slow, steady nourishment. But to unlock this magic, choosing the right kind of cardboard matters more than most gardeners realize. Now that we understand why cardboard can recreate the comfort of a forest floor, it's time to look at something gardeners often overlook. Not all cardboard is safe for your soil. In fact, the wrong type can work against everything you're trying to build. The best cardboard for gardening is the simplest kind, the plain brown sheets, with no coatings, no colored inks, and no glossy surfaces. These break down slowly and naturally, offering worms a clean, chemical-free shelter. I once worked with a couple who had recently downsized into a small home with a modest backyard. They eagerly tried the cardboard method, but unknowingly used shiny delivery boxes with waterproof coatings. After a few weeks, they noticed the soil underneath felt slick and strangely dry. The problem wasn't their effort, it was the cardboard. The coatings acted like a barrier, blocking airflow and preventing moisture from reaching the soil. When they switched to plain, uncoated cardboard, the difference was immediate. Moisture held longer, fungi appeared, and worms gathered beneath the surface. A simple rule of thumb is this: the more ordinary the cardboard looks, the better it is for your garden. When you tear it, you should see soft, fibrous layers inside. If it feels waxy, overly smooth, or unusually stiff, avoid it. Always remove tape labels and staples. They don't decompose, and they certainly don't belong in your garden. If you ever feel unsure, try a small test. Soak a piece in warm water. Good cardboard softens quickly and absorbs moisture easily. If it resists water or gives off a sharp chemical smell, it's best to set it aside. Once you have the right cardboard, you're ready for the next step, preparing your soil, so worms feel welcomed, safe, and ready to return. Now that you've gathered the right cardboard, the next step is to prepare the soil itself, because even the best cardboard can't work its quiet magic unless the ground beneath it feels welcoming. Think of this as smoothing the blankets before guests arrive. A little preparation goes a long way, especially for creatures as delicate as worms. Start by checking your soil's moisture. Many gardeners, especially those tending raised beds or older garden plots, struggle with soil that dries out quickly or forms a crust as soon as the sun hits it. Worms can't breathe in dry, compact soil. They need air pocket softness and a steady source of moisture. Begin by watering slowly and deeply, letting the water soak down rather than sit on the surface. This deep hydration signals to worms that conditions are returning to balance. If your soil feels hard or dense, gently loosen the top few inches with a fork. You're not tilling, you're simply creating tiny pathways for air and water to move. These small channels become breathing zones for worms and corridors for microbes to awaken and spread. I once helped an older neighbor with soil so compact it rang like pottery when you tapped it. After a gentle loosening and a slow, deep watering, we watched the soil shift from rigid to receptive in just a few days. As moisture settles in and oxygen reaches deeper layers, something subtle begins to stir. Microbes awaken, fungal threads stretch, and the soil shifts from silent to softly alive. These early signals are exactly what worms search for when choosing a new home. Once your soil feels evenly moist and lightly aerated, You're ready for the next step, soaking the cardboard and preparing it to become the foundation of a living, breathing habitat. With your soil now gently awakened, it's time to prepare the cardboard, not by simply laying it down dry, but by giving it a warm, nurturing soak that brings it to life. This step may feel small, yet it's one of the most powerful ways to attract worms quickly and naturally. Think of it as warming a cozy room before a guest arrives. The intention is simple. Soften the fibers, awaken the microbes, and create a material worms instantly recognize as safe. Begin by filling a bucket basin or even a large bowl with warm water. Not hot, just pleasantly warm, like the first rain of spring. When you submerge the cardboard, watch as it darkens and slowly absorbs the water. That change is more than visual. Warmth jumpstarts dormant microbes clinging to the surface. Within minutes, tiny fungal spores begin to hydrate, preparing to weave their way through the cardboard fibers once placed on the soil. As the cardboard softens, you'll notice it becomes flexible, almost cloth-like. This pliability allows it to mold itself to the soil's contours, creating a seal that locks in moisture and gently shades the earth beneath. Worms are drawn to this balance, a cool darkness paired with just the right level of dampness. I once showed this method to a gardening club of retirees, and one woman laughed as she lifted her soaked cardboard water, dripping from the edges. "It feels alive," she said, and she was right. The material had turned from dry trash into a living invitation. When your cardboard bends easily but still holds together, it's ready. Lift it carefully, allow the excess water to drip away, and prepare to set the stage for the transformation that comes next. Now that your cardboard is softened and alive with early microbial activity, it's time to place it onto the soil in a way that truly invites worms to return. This step may look simple from the outside, yet it's one of the most important moments in creating a habitat that feels both safe and irresistible to soil life. Begin by gently laying the soaked cardboard directly across the prepared soil. You'll notice how it hugs the contours of the ground, settling into dips and rises as if it were meant to be there. This snug fit helps lock in moisture while still allowing the soil beneath to breathe. Overlap the edges by a few inches so that no slivers of sunlight peek through. Worms love darkness, and even a thin beam of light can interrupt their comfort. Many gardeners make the mistake of immediately covering cardboard with heavy mulch or compost. But here's the secret that makes this method so effective. For the first 5 to 7 days, leave the cardboard completely uncovered. Damp cardboard resting directly on soil creates a warm, shaded pocket. Underneath, the pocket worms detect long before we ever lift the sheet. During this initial period, water lightly every 2 to 3 days to keep the surface moist. As the cardboard breathes and microbes multiply, a subtle earthy scent begins to rise, the kind worms can sense even from deep below. I once helped a friend who had given up on her garden after years of struggling with compacted soil. When she lifted a corner of her cardboard on day 6, her eyes widened. Tiny worm trails curved across the softened earth like signatures of returning life. This is the invitation zone, the moment worms feel welcomed. And now, with their attention captured, it's time to feed them. Once worms begin gathering beneath that first layer of softened cardboard, you've opened the door. Now it's time to set the table. Feeding the life under your garden isn't about dumping piles of scraps or overwhelming the soil. It's about offering small, steady gifts that encourage microbes to flourish and worms to stay. Think of it as placing a few welcoming treats on the doorstep rather than an entire feast at once. Start by sprinkling a thin layer of organic materials right on top of the cardboard. Vegetable peels, used coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, shredded leaves. Each of these begins breaking down, gently releasing earthy scents. Worms instinctively seek out. You don't need much. A sparse scatter works better than a heavy mound, which can turn sour or attract pests. Some foods are especially effective. Pumpkin and squash scraps, for instance, break down quickly and create hotspots of fungal activity. Rolled oats or a light sprinkle of cornmeal can also act as microbial starters. I once saw a gardener revive an entire raised bed simply by adding a handful of old oatmeal. Every 2 weeks, worms gathered beneath it like it was their favorite cafe. After distributing the scraps, cover everything with a thin layer of compost, about 2 to 3 inches. This compost acts as both a blanket and a catalyst. It hides the scraps' moderate moisture and introduces billions of helpful microbes that activate the entire system. Finally, water slowly so the layers settle into each other. Over the next few days, scraps soften, fungi spread, microbes multiply, and worms begin tunneling through the newly enriched environment. With the buffet established, the transformation beneath your feet is about to accelerate long before you see anything on the surface. By the time your cardboard is laid, the scraps are sprinkled and the compost is resting gently on top. Something remarkable begins to unfold beneath the surface, quietly, steadily, and long before you see any changes above ground. This is the part of the process that feels almost magical, because it reminds us that the most important work in a garden is often invisible. Within just a few days, fungal threads begin weaving through the softened cardboard, turning those once dry fibers into a living network. These fungi are among the first decomposers to arrive, and their presence is like a dinner bell to worms. They release subtle signals that worms can detect even from deep within the soil. Soon after, microbes awaken and begin multiplying by the thousands, feeding on sugars released as the cardboard breaks down. Their activity warms, the soil slightly holds moisture longer, and creates the earthy aroma associated with healthy soil. Worms follow these cues instinctively. When they arrive, their tiny movements act like nature's version of tilling, only far gentler and far wiser. Worms create tunnels that allow air to reach deeper layers. These channels pull water downward instead of letting it evaporate on the surface. With every pass through the compost and cardboard, worms leave behind castings, one of the most nutrient-rich natural fertilizers available. I once showed this process to a group of beginners, and one man said it reminded him of watching bread dough rise, quiet, slow, but undeniably alive. That's exactly what's happening. Hard soil begins to loosen. Dry soil begins to hold moisture. Lifeless soil begins to breathe again. And all of this happens without force, without chemicals, and without buying a single worm. Now let's explore when these underground changes finally become visible. One of the most encouraging parts of this method is how quickly the soil begins to respond. While the underground work starts almost immediately, the visible signs of transformation follow a gentle, predictable timeline, and each milestone offers its own quiet joy. In the first 2 weeks, you'll notice subtle but meaningful changes. The soil beneath the cardboard stays moist far longer than the surrounding areas, even on warm days. When you lift a corner, you may see tiny castings, narrow tunnels, or the faint shimmer of fungal threads. The scent alone, that deep, earthy aroma, is enough to tell you the ecosystem is waking up. For many gardeners, this early shift is the moment hope returns. After 1 month, the transformation becomes more obvious. Soil that once felt hard or clumpy begins breaking into soft, dark crumbs. Plant leaves may appear greener and more resilient, their stems stronger, their growth more balanced. Worm activity increases noticeably as they establish patterns of movement through the layers you created. I once visited a gardener who had nearly abandoned her raised beds, but after 4 weeks of using this method, her soil crumbled like cake between her fingers. I didn't know dirt could feel joyful, she said. By the end of 1 full season, the change is undeniable. Water retention improves dramatically, meaning less frequent watering. Root vegetables grow straighter. Flowers bloom more fully. Tomatoes form deeper root systems, that help them withstand heat. The cardboard and compost have blended into a nutrient-rich foundation, and worms have woven their quiet architecture throughout. This is the point where gardeners often pause in wonder, realizing their soil is no longer something to battle, but something alive and cooperative. Next, let's explore how to keep this healthy system thriving year after year. By the time your soil has softened, darkened, and begun humming with quiet life, you've created something truly precious, a balanced ecosystem that supports itself. But like any living system, it thrives with gentle care over time. Cardboard, as powerful as it is, eventually breaks down, feeding the soil until it becomes part of it. Knowing when and how to refresh it ensures that worms never lose their shelter or their steady source of carbon. Around 4 to 6 months after you begin, you'll notice the cardboard thinning, softening, and blending into the soil. This is exactly what you want. It means fungi, microbes, and worms have been hard at work. Still, it's also a sign that it's time to renew the layer. Start by brushing back any compost or mulch resting on top. Beneath it, you'll often find a tapestry of worm castings, fungal threads, and even tiny worm cocoons, a beautiful reminder of how alive your garden has become. Lay a fresh sheet of soaked cardboard directly over the old one. There's no need to remove the previous layer. Its remnants will continue feeding the soil as they dissolve completely. This new sheet resets the conditions worms adore: darkness, moisture, retention, slow decomposition, and a safe refuge from heat, dryness, and disturbance. For gardeners in mild climates, refreshing the layer in early spring and again in early fall works wonderfully. In hotter regions, adding a layer before the summer heat arrives can protect the soil from drying out. Over time, as the soil grows richer, each cycle becomes easier. Worms multiply faster, organic matter breaks down more smoothly, and the layers integrate almost effortlessly. Maintaining this gentle rhythm doesn't just support worms, it nourishes every plant growing above them. Now let's explore how cardboard and compost work together to take your soil to the next level. As your soil begins to flourish, you'll notice something fascinating. Cardboard alone is powerful, but when paired with compost, it becomes almost unstoppable. This combination mirrors the natural cycles found in the richest forests and meadows, where carbon and nutrients work hand in hand to build soil that grows healthier with each passing year. Cardboard provides the carbon structure, the shelter, the moisture retention, and the slow breakdown worms and fungi rely on. Compost, on the other hand, brings the nitrogen, minerals, and microbial diversity that energize the whole system. When these two meet, magic happens. Decomposition becomes steady and balanced, never too fast, never too slow. It's like giving your soil both a sturdy house and a fully stocked pantry. Once compost settles over the cardboard, billions of microbes begin migrating downward, colonizing the softening fibers. This microbial bloom is exactly what worms follow. They feed not just on the compost itself, but on the bacteria and fungi spreading across the cardboard. I once watched a gardener lift a piece of cardboard after 3 weeks and marvel at the transformation. It was soft, fragrant, and alive with movement. "It's like a miniature forest floor," she whispered. Together, cardboard and compost stabilize moisture beautifully. During dry spells, they hold water deep in the soil. During heavy rains, the layers absorb and slow runoff, preventing nutrients from washing away. Worms continuously mix the compost into the soil below, creating a natural, self-sustaining fertilization cycle. Over time, this partnership builds a soil foundation that grows richer, darker, and more resilient with every season. And once your garden reaches this stage of health, you're ready for the next skill, learning how to troubleshoot small issues before they grow. As your soil system becomes more alive, you may encounter small bumps along the way, and that's perfectly normal. In fact, learning to troubleshoot these gentle signals is one of the clearest signs that you're becoming not just a gardener, but a caretaker of living soil. Most issues are simple to resolve once you understand what your soil is trying to tell you. If you lift a corner of the cardboard and notice fewer worms than expected, don't worry. The most common culprit is inconsistent moisture. Worms rely on dampness to breathe, and when conditions swing too dry, they retreat deeper underground. A slow, deep watering, not a quick sprinkle, often brings them back within days. Sometimes temperature is the issue. During sudden heat waves or the cold spells, worms temporarily move deeper, waiting for milder conditions before returning to the cardboard layer. If you notice ants gathering, it usually means the area is too dry or there's too much sugary food on the surface. A thorough watering and a thin cover of compost can shift the balance back toward worms and microbes, encouraging the ants to move along naturally. Many gardeners also worry when they see white fungal growth spreading across the cardboard. But this is actually a wonderful sign. It means decomposition is healthy and active. Only when you see blue-green or gray mold should you intervene, and even then, simply lifting the cardboard for better airflow or adjusting moisture usually resolves the issue. If your cardboard dries too quickly, especially in windy or hot climates, place a ring of mulch around the edges. This acts like a moisture shield, keeping the center cool and inviting. Troubleshooting isn't a setback. It's a quiet conversation with your garden, one that deepens your understanding every season. To truly appreciate the power of this simple cardboard method, it often helps to hear from gardeners who once stood exactly where you are now. Frustrated, hopeful, searching for a solution that didn't require buying endless products or fighting stubborn soil. Their stories remind us that transformation is possible anywhere, no matter the size of your garden or the age of your soil. One woman I met lived in a small apartment with nothing but a narrow balcony. Her herbs always started strong but quickly faded as the potting mix dried out and lost life. When she placed a piece of soaked cardboard beneath a layer of compost in her containers, something remarkable happened. Worms migrated through the drainage holes, and within a month, her soil smelled rich and earthy again. Her basil, once wilted and fragile, became full and fragrant, a tiny oasis just outside her door. Another story comes from an older gentleman who had gardened for decades, but felt defeated by the clay-hard soil in his backyard. He believed his land was simply too far gone. Yet after laying soaked cardboard over deeply watered soil, he saw worms returning in numbers he hadn't seen since his youth. By the end of the season, he could push his hand several inches into soil that once resisted every tool. "It feels alive again," he said quietly. And then there's the busy mother who only had time to garden on weekends. Her flowers always drooped by midsummer, no matter how carefully she watered. After trying the cardboard method, her marigolds bloomed brighter, her dahlias stood taller, and her watering schedule dropped dramatically. The soil held moisture, the worms stayed. Her garden flourished without constant attention. These stories are proof that simple steps can create extraordinary change. Now let's bring everything together for your own transformation. Now that you've walked through every step, from understanding why worms leave to preparing the soil, soaking your cardboard, building a gentle buffet, and watching the underground magic unfold, it's time to bring this journey together. What you now carry isn't just a gardening trick. It's a simple natural system that can restore even the most exhausted soil with quiet reliability. Think for a moment about how far your soil can come with just moisture, organic matter, and a few sheets of plain brown cardboard. You've learned that worms aren't creatures you buy. They're partners who arrive when the environment feels right. You've seen how cardboard mimics the forest floor, how compost energizes the system, and how microbes weave an invisible network that strengthens everything around them. I once taught this method to a retired couple who had nearly given up on their backyard garden. Their soil was pale and lifeless, their flowers thin and weary. But with patience and a few layers of soaked cardboard, their garden began to shift. By mid-season, their tomato vines were full and strong. The husband who had gardened since boyhood lifted a handful of soil one morning and whispered, "I haven't seen soil like this in years." Your soil can experience that same renewal. Each layer you build becomes an invitation for life. Each worm that arrives becomes part of a growing community beneath your feet. As the soil improves, so does your confidence and your joy. Whether you're tending vegetables, caring for houseplants, or nurturing a small patio garden, this method brings nature back into balance gently, quietly, beautifully. All that's left is for you to begin. Lay down your first sheet, water deeply, trust the process. Now let's move into the closing message that brings this journey home. As we come to the end of this journey together, take a quiet moment to appreciate just how powerful a simple idea can be. Something as ordinary as a sheet of cardboard, a material most people toss away without a second thought, can transform not only the health of your soil, but the entire experience of tending your garden. It reminds us that nature doesn't always need complicated solutions. Often it responds best to gentleness, patience, and small acts of care. You now understand why worms stay or leave, how moisture and microbes shape the life beneath your plants, and how the right environment invites nature to do the work for you. By adding steady moisture, a softened layer of cardboard, and a bit of organic matter, you're rebuilding the foundation that every thriving garden rests on. Worms return, fungi spread, microbes awaken, and suddenly your soil becomes a living, breathing partner instead of something you struggle against. Whether you're nurturing a tiny balcony planter or tending a full backyard, remember this comforting truth. Healthy soil isn't something you buy, it's something you encourage. And with what you've learned today, you have everything you need to begin. I'd love to hear from you. Have you tried using cardboard in your garden before? Are you excited to give this method a try? Share your stories, your questions, or even your worries in the comments. I read everyone, and your experiences often help other gardeners find their way too. If today's lesson brought you inspiration, clarity, or even just a spark of curiosity, please like the video and subscribe to GreenSpace Inspirations. There are many more gentle, practical ideas coming your way, and I'd be honored to share them with you. Your soil's transformation starts now. Let's grow something beautiful together.